Okay. Yeah, so what we do here is we read and review philosophy papers. This is on meaning by Algirdas, Julien, Greimas, Algirdas, I don't know. And this was out of New Literary History on Greimasian semiotics from 1989. So this is a classic paper at this point. The 1980s were a while away. But as always, yeah, there's the cover page, yeah. Well, I was looking for other stuff, but it don't matter now. But yeah, thank you anyway, Semiotics. And so as always, I read this, we review this. This is my first time reading it. Let me know what you think along the way. Ask any questions. I will try to answer them. I'm not endorsing this. It's my first time reading it too. It's some academic work. So let's head in and see how it goes. Okay. Before getting to the main topic of this paper, I would like to make a number of preliminary remarks. First, a certain amount of ambiguity is linked to the concept of structuralism, which, as far as I'm concerned, can be understood only in relation to that of signification. For North American structuralism, for example, Bloomfield and distributionalism, meaning exists, but one can say nothing about it. However, as far as French structuralism is concerned, meaning happens to be the essential dimension of language. Therefore, from this perspective, it can easily be seen that I am a post-structuralist. A second distinction should be made here, which, for want of a better term, I shall call philosophical. Structuralist philosophy devalorizes structural structuralism and renders it banal. By contrast, I represent what could be called scientific structuralism, just as physics can be said to be structuralist. Yeah, and so we were talking about this before. The structures of physics sort of remain over time, the mathematical ones. Yeah, this is a lovely introduction. Well, glad you like it. So yeah, there are like overarching sort of structures that remain even as theories change, and these can be like understood in mathematical terms. That's quite often like a gloss on this scientific structuralism. A further point to be made is related to structure and meaning. However, it should be added that meaning can be apprehended only as articulated meaning. In other words, we know nothing about meaning except that we can talk about it in terms of signification. It should thus be clear that my first preoccupation was to come to grips with the concept of meaning as structure. In other words, it was necessary to think about the minimal conditions for the appearance, apprehension, and/or production of meaning. This led to the formulation of the elementary structure of signification that can be represented metalinguistically by what has been called the semiotic square. Hence, meaning was defined first of all translation or transcoding, then as orientation or intentionality. Alright, I don't know what the elementary structure of signification is, but apparently this means something important to the author. So it says this paper was read at a conference sponsored by the French Department of French and the Center for Comparative Literature at the University of Toronto in 1985. Interesting. So this is so I wonder if this was originally in French. But yeah, this is... Alright, so what we're talking about are what are the structures in language. So you can look at some of the linguistics and how they're applied, and that's sort of like a semiotic view of things. What are the structures applying to what is like signified, the signifier, what's going on here? Okay. Before raising the issue of the development of semiotics and distinguishing it in several states, it should be said that semiotics is not a science whose development is completed, but a scientific project. This is why it cannot be understood, or it can hardly be understood unless it is considered a historical process, one in which, after the fact, we can recognize several stages or several distinct states which are separated by a series of transformations situated within a continuity and which are not epistemological breaks as progress brought about by individual, but also and especially by collective thought and effort. Yeah, so again, we're looking at this like structure of scientific revolution thing where a lot of people are putting in little bits and pieces here and there, and it contributes to like sort of like this project. It would be useful to mention a few fundamental principles on which semiotic theory, as I understand it, rests. This will, I hope, clarify the entire project. First, semiotics is generative, not exactly in the Chomskyan sense, but as a coherent description of the generation of signification, not as it is, but as signifying objects which are produced. Second, such a concept of generation makes it possible to introduce the notion of hierarchical level in the description of languages. There seems to exist in the social sciences a sort of consensus about levels. A. Deep structures versus surface structures. B. Latent level versus manifest level. And C. Immanent versus transcendent. So that the first is from Chomsky, the second from Freud, and then the third from, I guess you'd say, Helmslev. I don't know how to say that. Sorry. Author should add here that the construction of a theory is of a metalinguistic nature, that is to say, the number of levels of depth is heuristic in nature and depends on the strategy of discovery adopted. It should also be noted that a specificity of semiotic theory is related to levels of depth that are in a way equivalent. They are isotopic but not equal, as would be the case in logic, which is simply tautological. There is an increase in meaning arising out of the simple fact that, when passing from one level to another, the quantity of articulations of signification increases. Third, what is obvious today, but was once difficult for people to accept, is that the generative apparatus produces discourses, that is to say, totalities of meaning in terms of words or sentences. Finally, I would like to finish up this list of principles, and there are many of them, with a methodological principle, which is the primary condition for the scientificalness of all semiotic research.
I salute you.
Thanks for the follow, Miro3. So, with a methodological principle, which is the primary condition for the scientificalness of all semiotic research in the humanities and social sciences. I'm referring to the principle of relevance or pertinence borrowed from linguistics. This means that to describe a certain phenomenon, elements situated either at an immediately superior or inferior plane can be used. Yeah, so you got to remember, in any discussion, there are things that are sort of taken for granted in the background, and then there's the topics of discussion that you think are important now. And so you've got these different levels, and so if you're talking about meaning, you're going to have a few different levels, but it's going to be heuristic. There's going to be things you take for granted, things that, like, you know, you use to describe what matters here, and then those are the things you take for granted, and then if you want to describe those, there might be some other things the way you describe them, but you're only going to get a few different, like, spots. Yeah, what's up? We're discussing some semiotics at the moment. This is a semiotic theory of meaning. Please define heuristic, please. So a heuristic is, well, the shorthand rule of thumb is that it is a shorthand rule of thumb. That's what a heuristic is. So, for example, if the classic example is like, if you're going to go catch a ball being thrown in the air, you could calculate the physics. You could calculate the trajectory, the wind resistance, the like force it got like sent up with, and where it's going to land in the like parabolic shape that, you know, gravity creates for it. And then you could run to that spot and catch the ball. No one does that. That's crazy. What people do, and what is true about this, is that if you actually are looking at something and it appears to be floating, that means it's coming right at you. And so if you can actually maintain the same angle on an intercept with it, you will run into it. So if you can keep the same angle from like your head to the ball, and then run towards it in a way that keeps the same angle constant, you will intercept the trajectory of the ball. That's a heuristic. You do not actually calculate the trajectory of the ball. You use the rule of thumb that says if you keep your the angle of view at the ball constant, even as it's moving, you will intercept it. And that's what actual ball players do. So you keep it so that like the angle of the angle that you're looking at is the same. So it's a rule of thumb. It does not calculate the objective truth about like where it's going to land in like sort of a numerical way. What it is a method for you getting to where you need to go without actually doing all that work. Marothrin says, in terms of philosophy of language, my understanding is the main leaders nowadays are Brandom, Putnam, Chalmers for their work in inferentialism, Brandom in externalism, Putnam and Chalmers. Yeah, so that's I mean, I wouldn't call Chalmers a philosopher of language at all. He is philosophy of mind. Robert Brandom, I know less, but like, yeah, this is what we're talking about. And Hilary Putnam, he got to be, if he ain't dead, he's got to be ancient. So, yeah, and Frank says, yeah, it's an estimation. It's a quick and dirty estimation that gets you close enough to the answer that you're looking for without actually needing to be an answer. Chalmers does have work in two-dimensional semantics. That's fair. I haven't looked at that in... Wow, I forgot about two-dimensional semantics. People like that. But, like, yeah. He's deceased but influential in modern post-analytic work. Yeah. So, I mean, the idea... these are, like, the perspectives on it, and that's fair. But, like, yeah, I mean, these are all fair names to be discussing in philosophy of language in this area. But, like, yeah, that's okay. This is a different approach, though. This is a semiotic approach. The semiotics is sort of like, it's closer to a logical analysis of things. So you're not doing stuff with the language. You're doing stuff in terms of a sort of a more of a logical scheme, but not exactly logic also. So it's not really philosophy of language. It's more based on different principles. So that's what we're doing here. Semiotics. So this is not straight up philosophy of language either. So you're talking about levels, but these levels are sort of, they're abstractions when you're trying to get at meaning. You're not trying to analyze the language per se. So you're not just giving a theory of meaning in terms of the semantics. You're sort of looking at an abstraction of how you might generate a semantics. Yeah. Rothman says, my understanding is semiotics were led by structuralist Ferdinand de Saussure and the pragmatist C.S. Peirce, but I don't know specific principles of the discipline. Yeah, I think that's the history. That's right. So, and their semiotics actually don't line up, the Saussure and the Peirce. But, like, yes, that's the history. So Peirce is the originator, I guess you might say, and then other people have ran with it in various ways. Semiotics says language is a subdiscipline of semiotics, even though linguistics came first. Yeah. So again, it's like it's like a logical abstraction on this stuff, and so you can like sort of fit it into a theory of semiotics. Of course, language came first. Yeah, Latin means Jesus. What's up? Pointers and symbols, which have pointers that lead you to symbols, which point you to symbols. Blah, and it goes around circles. But like these are like the. This is why it came out of logic, or it's related to logic, because you're using like this sort of basic structure to discuss it. And so it's like, of course, the linguistics is already a developed field. Like people know about like language and analysis, but it's taking a step back and like using these sorts of ideas to analyze the raw materials or the raw data of what's going on in language. Yeah, okay. So everything is a sign. Yes, Saussure did start it, but he's the one that described it as encompassing language and everything else. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, feel free to keep asking questions, Miro. I don't know. We all carry meaning and context. Toenail and philosophy roulette. Absolutely. Okay. It would be useful to clarify the semiotic project in terms of history, albeit a short one, of the progressive conceptualization of the theory. I will briefly trace 4 major steps in the evolution of semiotic theory from my personal point of view. In 1956, I published an article entitled La actualité du Saussurisme, which my students who have since become professors consider to be an important starting point. That's funny. Changes native to raw data. What's up, Verdun? In this article, the author examined works by Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Claude Lévi-Strauss and concluded that the Saussurian postulate of a structured world, apprehensible in its significations, can indeed contribute to the elaboration of a unified methodology for the humanities and social sciences. That's a sentence and a half. Least humble brag. Yeah, exactly. Reading Jesus. Oh, man. It's like, oh, my students have liked my work. Yeah, it's very nice of you. Yeah. It was roughly at this time that I became aware of the fact that although structuralism in its many forms focused mainly on problems of language from a linguistic perspective, for example, Claude Lévi-Strauss and Georges Dumézil in anthropology, Roland Barthes in literature, and Jacques Lacan in psychoanalysis, to name a few of the dominant figures who revolutionized their respective disciplines, no structural linguists per se were attempting to do the same in their own field. In France, the latest word in linguistics was Bloomfeld and distributionalism. Nevertheless, it was apparent that by extrapolating concepts borrowed from Ferdinand de Saussure and Louis Hjelmslev, and foregoing new methods of, if I say anything wrong, just let me know in chat. I don't know how to say names. I barely know how to say anything. Forging new methods of investigation, great strides were being made in various domains of the humanities and social sciences. I can say that as a linguist, I was more inspired by Dumézil and Levi-Strauss than by other linguists, with the exception of Saussure and Hjelmslev, of course. And they're all doctors and important people now. You should have all been my student. Why didn't you all be my student? And now you'd all have tenured professorships. Miro says, to their understanding, Saussurean semiotics was known for its emphasis on differentiation between words. For example, cat is not just a cat, but also a non-dog. I don't know the history here, so I can't correct you if you're wrong. But you remember something and you believe ChatGPT or Wikipedia, so you'll take it with a grain of salt. I don't know the background theory here. I'm not an expert in semiotics. Most of my stuff is more philosophy of logic, metaphysics, and theory of knowledge. That's my background, what I work on mostly. So it's like, I don't know this, but like if that's what like Wikipedia says, I would take Wikipedia's version of it. ChatGPT, I don't trust enough at this point, but like, yeah, it probably will get this sort of thing right. Semiotics in chat will know this better than I do. So it's like, yeah. Okay. However, it should be noted that discourse analysis came about more or less by accident, since Levi-Strauss' work was paradigmatic in nature. That is to say, it consisted in setting correlations into place. You would take A and non-A. Okay, so yeah, so now we're getting into just what you were saying. A and non-A, B and non-B, and then set up correlations and end up with the Oedipus myth. His revolutionary article, quote, The Structural Study of Myth, end quote, which appeared in the Journal of American Folklore in 1955, investigates the Oedipus myth, which can be articulated by means of 4 terms. Although the study provided a paradigmatic basis for the analysis of myth, it still did not correspond to discourse analysis. Roland Barthes, the day he asked Levi-Strauss to... I accompanied Roland Barthes the day he asked Levi-Strauss to direct his thesis. Wow, name dropping too. Okay. Levi-Strauss refused, but mentioned to Barthes that there existed an American translation of a certain Vladimir Propp. Barthes gave me the reference and I sent to Indiana University Press for the book. Although this is anecdotal, I would like to say that Propp furnished the syntagmatic or syntactic component for my work. My theoretical genius, if I can so call it, was a form of bricolage. I took a little Levi-Strauss and added some Propp. This is what I call the first stage of semiotics. When I examined Propp's work on folk tale and analyzed it, I noticed that 4 principal segments could be identified, and that these segments could be paired, and that 2 of these pairs made up a Levi-Straussian schema. It was just an early, since Max says, it was just an early example to get people to understand that the sign and the signification are separate steps. Yep, okay. Laffian says, Jesus Christ, get off your own dick. My days, just make your argument. Yeah, so I don't know if you heard at the beginning, but this was I think like an invited speech at a conference. So yeah, this paper was read at a conference sponsored by the Department of French and the Center for Comparative Lit in 1985. So he does get to pat himself on the back a little bit, I think, here. Is that this is like an invited speech to an interested crowd. But like, yes. So he's going to get somewhere, I think, eventually, but I also appreciate that this is a speech. It's a lot easier for me to read something that was meant to be read to people than a lot of the philosophy which I read, which was probably never intended to be read out loud. Miro says, do I take suggestions for philosophy to check out on stream? I do. You can suggest things to read. There are some restrictions on them, like I do not do anything too scientific-y or with too many formulas, because like I could read them off, but you have to already understand what's going on in the formal stuff to understand what like the meaning is. So I can't do anything too technical on stream. But if it's published philosophy, yes. If it's stuff that is unpublished, then quite often I've read it a few times in the past and it's been terrible. But like I also will read other stuff like poetry and other things like that. So it's like yes, but with a few restrictions. They should not be rambling that much. Yes, in a seminar, they shouldn't be. Yep. Yeah, they asked him to gloat. They didn't ask him to gloat, but like it's acceptable in this sort of like where you say my theoretical genius, if I can so call it. Like, the idea that you could even say a sentence like that, you have to be among friends. Otherwise, everyone's going to roll their eyes. Miro says, I recommend if you do metaphysics or work of existential phenomena like Sean Kelly and Carl Jaspers, do anything with phenomenology or works by. Yeah, I read some, there's a old lectures at Harvard with Sean Kelly and Hubert Dreyfus that I recommend if you're interested in that stuff. I listened to them years ago. They were good. But like, yeah, I mean, if you're around before, like normally how my streams go is I just chatting for the first hour basically, then I get into reading stuff. So if you look at the stream time on whatever app you're using, I'm at an hour 38. So I started maybe about 30 minutes ago, maybe a little less today, reading this paper. So it's like, yeah. So if you get in at that first time, or you can request it like ahead of time, like be like, hey, I'm going to be around in a week. Could you read this next time? Then we can plan ahead too. Sinister MX says, I think there's nothing name dropping that require be true in general. I'm pretty sure most name dropping is fake. Where people say they met someone they just saw, they met the grocery store, someone famous. I mean that's true, but this is pretty hardcore to say. I accompanied Roland Barthes the day he asked Levi Strauss to direct his thesis. Levi Strauss refused. That's a pretty bold statement to make up. I mean, most of the time people are bullshitting, but this person is definitely not bullshitting because this is too big of a claim to do. And especially at a conference where people might be like, who the fuck are you? Yeah, so you're all the more suspicious? Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, it feels like to make really big claims in front of an audience that, and the thing's going to be published, then maybe, but like it's hard. They didn't invent fact checking yet because it was the 80s. Perhaps. Okay. So where were we? So the author examined Dumezil's analysis of myth and overanalyzed it in a Levi Straussian manner. No one wanted this article, so I then said to myself, what if I send it directly to Levi Strauss, which I did. Levi Strauss wrote me to come to see him, and 6 months later, I was director at some place in France. So much for the anecdotal side, but Prop arrived in Paris via the USA. Okay, that's funny. So the problem here is, now that we've gotten to this little section, this is a fact. That this person had to have been a director at some place in France, and that would have been a known fact at the time. So this is sort of like, even if it's an apocryphal made-up backstory, there is some like verifiable fact at this point. So yeah. The second stage of semiotics began in 1964 when Bart and I gave separate seminars based on Helmslev's linguistic and semiotic theories. He later published his findings under the title Elements de Semiologie, and I published mine as Semantique Structurale. Later, around 1970, an attempt was made to formulate better the elements of narrativity. The principle consisted in saying that what Prop called a function was not a function but a sentence, that is to say, an utterance which unraveled, according to Reichenbachian logic, a function, verb, and actance. I don't know what an actant is. An attempt was made to attain a global comprehensive of narrative. Miro says, yeah, I mean, I don't know what your streaming schedule is, but if it's possible for you to plan stream soon reading Jaspers, that would be nice. Reason I've been looking into more him and playing, maybe reading his book, Way to Wisdom, eventually having a philosophy stream to follow along with would be nice. Yeah, so I can only read, the other part of this is I can only read things that fit into a stream. I don't really read papers that go more than one stream. I have done that in the past, but like, I'd have to have some special reason to do that. So I don't normally do that. So I can only read usually less than 18 pages at a time. So this is a 13 or 12 or 13 page document here. This is what I'm very happy reading. Because if I start reading for anything more than 3 hours, I start to lose my mind. I actually physically damage myself if I do this too long, and I'll be messed up like the next day. And I don't like doing that. Like, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. Like, it just fucks my head up. So there is a word limit too. So it's like, if you had a short article on the stuff, I would consider it. I can't do long articles. Like, I could do a short book chapter. I could do a, like secondary source or a short article on that from Jaspers. But I can't really do like whole books or anything like that. They were, back when I was hitting 500 or like maybe 400 or maybe 300, I was going to like, sit around reading all like Nietzsche all night. But frankly, who gives a shit? Like, it's just not that interesting, most of it. The third stage of semiotics began in the early 1970s. It was still related to discourse analysis and the organization of a theory of narrativity. The starting principle was that the function as a verb is overdetermined by two things: modalities and aspectualities. No idea what an aspectuality is. Black boxes, empty slots were worked in much in the same way they had been in Chomsky. The modalities were explored and then articulated into four fundamental ones: two virtualizing and two actualizing ones. On the one hand, wanting and having to virtualize the process, and on the other, being able and knowingly actualize it. Lavrian says, I'm a post-Andy, so it's always difficult looking for a self-contained post-structuralist paper that's understandable enough sense, context, and not an actual tome. Aspect study is an aspectuality. Thank you, semiotics. Yeah, so I know we've got a bunch of people that are like, interested in philosophy that does not normally get written in short papers. We've gotten lucky before and had some really good stuff on different theories that were short, but it feels like those were rare. But like, yeah, it's like, it's not the easiest thing to like find something that's self-contained that can be read in basically 2 hours. Okay. Continuing. This led to defining the act itself more or less along the same lines. An act consists in causing things to happen or to be. But in order for things to be, they have to be realized. In order for them to be realized, the conditions for realization must be met. That is to say, one has to be able to do, or to know how to do, and so on. Along with the act as a causing, a whole problematics of the competence of doing was developed. Causing became performance. The term was borrowed from Chomsky, but given a totally different meaning. But since Chomsky, as you know, had borrowed this from 17th and 18th century French theoreticians, this was simply an exchange of good procedures. What became obvious is that if you want to construct a narrative grammar, then it has to be a modal grammar. This is where the revolutionary concept of the whole project took place, since if doing or causing are broken down, then, for example, to communicate can be analyzed as to cause to know. It is not a knowing how, but a causing to know. That is to say, the causing can be in either a realizing or a virtualizing position. Okay, so so now we're getting somewhere. What is it to actually communicate is to get other people to know things. And how do you do that? It's like a realizing or virtualizing position. So you have to like do something to force a realization or a virtualization of some ideas that then other people can take up. Latvian says, if I wanted to send postscript on societies of control, you would need to have read Foucault, section Discipline and Punish, on societies of control to know what is being commented on in the postscript, for example. Yeah. Well, to be fair, Laughing Jesus, I've read tons of stuff that I don't have context for. And sometimes it goes better, sometimes it goes worse. I'm not that fussed about not getting everything right. I've gotten lots of things wrong streaming. That's not the point. The point is to read the stuff and see what we can get out of it. Now, if we were trying to do everything accurately, well, you're going to have to go to school and sit there and like study it. I'm not getting everything right, but then again, that's not the point. Laughing says, or is actual dog shit like objects as temporary autonomous zones paper? Yeah, that was kind of ridiculous. Yeah, that was terrible. Now that I think about that, that was quite terrible. But like, yeah. So I'm not against getting stuff wrong and just seeing where we go, but again, that may just make people angry who know what is going on. All right. So, thus, doing or causing and being are modalities. Yeah, so these are things we can do. We can cause people to understand stuff. You can be something, and that's a way of like existing. These are modalities, modes we can be in. From this point of view, the whole grammar is composed of modalities. The rest is simply content semantics. To begin in this way is to possess a powerful and homogeneous model, since a pertinent articulation has been found, and from start to finish we are speaking about the same thing. Form, according to Helmslev, remains form, that is to say signifying form, but the model becomes operational. We worked on discourse analyses of text and noticed that the text enabled us to organize models. Moreover, these models could also be used to describe social practices. We therefore went from literary semiotics to sociology. This is important since we were able to provide sociologists with models of the organization of behavior, or I should say social practices, but with the difference that our models are based on the solid and rigorous analyses of texts, whereas theirs are based on parameters constructed by intuition. I mean, you're still doing intuition of texts in some sense. You're not going to get out of hermeneutics here. You're still interpreting the text in some way. So I can appreciate everyone likes their own discipline, but like the solid and rigorous analyses of text, whereas theirs based on parameters constructed by intuition, I think that's slightly unfair to the sociologists to say they just picked shit out of nowhere and that's how they describe the world. But, to each their own. Semiotics became demanding by positing its own necessities. Finally, narrativity was seen not as simply Narrativity was seen not simply narrativity, but as the syntactic form of the organization of the world. This is the decisive turn that separates us from semiologists, who continue to analyze literary text and who then are transformed into Derridians and Foucauldians, for example. Yeah, so you're trying to get a structure in the text, and you're just not trying to analyze it on some other thing, like some other theory there. That's why semiotics is kind of its own thing. It has its own structure, and it is not just a philosophy among some of the other philosophies. This undermines linguists, though. Yeah, that's kind of I don't know if you want to say undermines. This is a different perspective. It's like saying logic undermines linguistics. It does not. Semiotics does not undermine logic. It does not undermine linguistics. Everyone, favors their own topic. And so this person's very excited. Like we were saying earlier, this person is among friends. This is an invited speech at a conference, it sounds like. And so there is a little bit of raw semiotics going on here. I feel like it. So if you just leave it to a philosopher to not pay any attention to this operationalization of sociology, too many scary equations in the methods of sociologists. This is comparative lit people, actually. This is semiotics and comparative lit. That's where this was, and French. That's where this was presented. This was not a philosophy conference. Do not be beating up on me because this person really likes semiotics. Like, it's cool. Oh, you agree? Stockdale agrees with them? There you go. Yeah, raw semiotics. Yeah, rah. Miro says, I don't believe semiotics even counts as philosophy. Yeah, that's a fair take. It is not usually taught in philosophy departments at the moment. It came out of Charles Sanders Peirce, who is generally considered a philosopher. So there's overlap here, and it's not treated as a philosophical topic at the moment, but it's definitely a nearby one. And so it's like, I wouldn't say this is so far off. Latvian says fair should know better than split language with majors and philosophy majors. Yes, that's yeah. This is a fucking free. I am philosopher and a semiotician. Yeah, so depends where you draw party lines, and that's a political thing where you draw the lines are, and it doesn't really matter. So what are you trying to do? I mean, Foucault's a philosopher, Derrida is a philosopher, so like we're talking all about philosophers here. So even though this was not given at a philosophy conference, we're talking philosophers. Seriously, I don't think you understand. There's nothing that we do in semiotics that does not also count as philosophy. Seriously. No, that's fair. What my point was, I don't know if you're talking to me or Miro, but most of the time in philosophy departments, you don't see semiotics courses as much anymore. I was talking more of a historical point. That's all. Yeah. So once you do semiotics, you never go back. That's fair. It's like it is a way of analyzing stuff. Yep. And there's other philosophies. Yeah, I was just making more of a historical point. Yeah. Okie doke. Where were we? Lavian says a semiotician must be a philosopher. To be a philosopher doesn't mean to be a semiotician. Yeah, and that's like anything. Like, I do logic. Not all philosophers do logic, but like you have to know something about it. But if you're doing logic, you're probably going to be a philosopher too. Although you could be on the math side. But yeah, same stuff. Philosophy of semiotics. Yep. So yeah, this is all like nearby philosophy of language stuff, linguistic stuff, logic-y stuff. These are all very nearby. Okay. Yeah. All right. During this phase, we abandoned Propp's formula of the tale as a meaning of analyzing narrative. What interests us was to come up with a syntax that functioned more or less as a calculus. And see, this is more of the logic-y stuff where you're going to do something as a calculus that just like you're just calculating. You're not you're not interpreting. You're just shutting up and calculating. It is not that we completely abandon heroes and traders, but to calculate the behavior of heroes, we need terms like subject, object, simple things like conjunctions, disjunctions, and transformations, for example. In short, we needed an elementary syntax situated between various types of narratives, and without noticing it, we began to work on something other than the tale. Miro says, in terms of structuralism, to my understanding, structuralist semiotics was influenced by Piaget, who's not a traditional philosopher, but a psychologist who works in influencing philosophy. Again, yes, but what's it matter, like, what we are calling people historically? It's still, like, these are people who are all nearby and the same ideas. It's like, yeah, but the historical lines don't matter so much. Yeah, artificial divisions, academia. So, like, it matters if you're, like, you really care about, like, the history and what everyone thought they were doing, but, like, from our like, it's 2025. Grow up, people. Like, if someone has something relevant to you, just jump on it. It's like, it does, like, the lines don't matter so much. Like, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Grab what you can from who you can, because there's good work being done all over. Lavian says, not too far from metaphysics either. Anti-essentialists love their pointers, which lead to pointers. Argument against final essence is you end up getting pointed around. There's no point that's the true thing, just another pointer to look deeper. Yeah, so it comes with the metaphysics too. It comes with a certain way of looking at the world. Okay. We discovered that Propp's model was intuitive and that it could be broken down to parts into important sequences that were covered over by the model. In other words, we discovered semiotics of manipulation, how the sender manipulates the subject, then a semiotics of action, how competence is acquired to carry out performance, and finally a semiotics of sanction, that is to say, passing judgments on self, on others, and on things. Semiotics was, in a way, freed from Propp. Since we noticed that there were constraints in Propp, I proposed the Proppian tale be considered as an ideological narrative schema. With different variations, this is more or less man's quest for the meaning of life, for the meaning of individual life, and for the meaning of collective life. I think this all brings us back to Sisyphus? Yeah, well, that's fair. Do I like Piaget out of curiosity? I don't know enough Piaget to make any comment on him. I've heard some lectures about him from Jordan Peterson. He seems more generally good in terms of his model of cognitive schema, but not in favor with everyone. I have no idea. I do not like Jordan Peterson. So, yeah. Well, since semiotics, I'm the only person that will cancel it, so I won't say the guy's name anymore. But, like, it's, yeah. I don't know Piaget. I'm not into psychology in that area so much. I just don't have a comment on it. And I generally dislike any of the popularizer, like, podcasty, wannabe philosophers out there. Of course, there's, like, legit people who are, like, legit professors of philosophy, but anybody who is just, like, claiming to be philosopher, like, online and has, like, a following, they're just demagogues. Piaget is pretty damn old. I was taught in high school as an already dated view of development. Yeah, so these are just old. I mean, this is the history. I mean, you can like the history and different people in it, so it's fine. Okay. From this perspective, the ex-Proppian model of the narrative schema can be widely generalized. One example is the application of semiotics to psychomotor therapy by Ivan Duro. Psychiatrists treat autistic children by applying psychomotor therapy through play, which stimulates them since they do not speak. Right, this is gonna be some weird shit because like this is 1980s theories of autism. I have no idea what this is gonna look like. Latvian says developmental psych has blown way past Piaget stages. Yeah. Well, we've blown past everything at this point. Like, modern research just moves fast. Sensei Max says, I still can't get over the time he said that he didn't understand what the heck Terry was saying and then maybe Terry or Derrida was saying, and proceeded to try to explain for another half hour, which shows how ridiculous it was, which demonstrates only that he was ridiculous for pretending to be able to lecture on something he admitted in the very first sentence he did not understand. Yeah, so this is the difficult part. People think they can explain everything because, they know a few things. Not true. I mean, as I've said, I'm perfectly happy being wrong here. You tell me when I'm wrong here, I'll eat it, I'll buy it, I will own it when I'm wrong. I mean, I do know how to argue a bit, so I might argue with you, but if I'm wrong, just tell me to fuck off. It's fine. You like that guy personally, although I have some disagreements with him. Okay, I mean, I hope he's good for you. I don't like him at all. The children knew what they were doing, whereas the psychiatrist did not. Oh, wait, I missed something. Okay, Darrow noticed that while these children did not speak, they nonetheless possessed modal competence, the four modalities. The children knew what they were doing, whereas the psychiatrist did not. On the practical plane, the psychiatrist sometimes succeeded in improving the children's condition, but theoretically, they did not know why. Indeed, videotaped therapy sessions that were analyzed by semioticians showed what level on the narrative scheme the children had reached and what had to be aimed for in the following sessions. So that's interesting. They're saying that the semiotic analysis gave better direction than the psychological at these cases. I mean, I wonder how true this is, or if this has been backed up. But again, this is raw semiotics right here. As far as the fourth semiotic stage is concerned, what remains to be done is to construct a discursive syntax, since a narrative syntax based on modalities is already in place. Yet, in much the same way that at the intermediate level, it was necessary to set up a modal syntax, what was needed at the discursive level was an aspectual syntax. This is currently our major preoccupation. The difference that exists between being and becoming could help illustrate the above. What is the meaning of becoming? The concept as such escapes understanding. Let us take the example of Old French. It has been said that Old French was a declension language with two cases, the nominative and the accusative. It has also been said that in passing from Old French to modern French, Old French lost its declensions. I would like to know when. This is still in the state of becoming. At no time in history can the passage from Old French to modern French be noticed. Obviously, if it has two stages of the language 300 years apart are examined, it can be seen at one point we are dealing with Old French and at the other modern French. During and becoming, duration and becoming are situated between these 2 points. Though duration, which is continual and gradual, can be cut up infinitely, it remains beyond our grasp. That is the human condition. That is how we live. Yeah, so this is what I was saying earlier. There's too many things we can cut up in our experience. I was saying this earlier today. Yet, if we take a prior state, and a transformation between them, the states can be seen to exist. This is what I have called construction. That is to say, the human mind constructs transformations in this temporal flux. But what is duration? It is one of the grammatical aspects. In addition to the temporal and spatial aspectualizations just mentioned, a third actorial one can be identified. Finally, in the syntax that needs to be set up, causing or doing must correspond to processes, that is to say, spatial, temporal, and aspectual processes which begin, which last, and which finish. Okay, so basically, you're just getting a whole bunch of these logical and linguistic pieces that you're putting together, and you're making a formal machine that you can churn in. You can put some sort of acts in, and then you're gonna get some sort of act out, some sort of event in, event out here. Just it's gonna take a whole lot of analysis to do that. This whole thing right here, this is a shit ton of analysis. You're gonna have to what sort of things are they taking as the background modalities, and then what's the raw data that they're looking at. It is a pain in the butt. You're making up a localized psychology of what's going on. Well, it's really a semiotic, but still, be sort of psychological too. I mean, that's what they were dealing with. There was a psychological case. Okay. Anywho. It would be a truism to say that we are living through a moment of value crisis, a state of disbelief where no one believes in anyone else or anything. And this was 1985. We've been like this for a while now. It kind of sucks. All right, and so 5 years ago, I thought it would be interesting to study morals. Formerly in France, ridicule was deadly, but we noticed that unacceptable is now the new deadly word. When Chirac says that the behavior of the socialists is unacceptable, they take it seriously and take it as a statement of value. Yet morally, to say this is to condemn. And what type of value does this represent? What is acceptable? It is socially savoir-faire. The moral being set in place, which is more important than good and evil, is founded on the modalities of knowing how and being able, which are part of moral honor. Miro says, I don't know much about semiotics, but I know a little bit about the media theorists and philosopher Marshall McLuhan, and a point he made. Yeah. And I agree with this, and things backed up by historical evidence, that the medium used for communication affects the message, so communication can't be studied outside the socio-technological context. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Yeah, so the media theory and Marshall McLuhan, yeah, that's good stuff. So I'm still waiting to see where this goes. This is just kind of a history at the moment in this paper. So, like, the history of how the semioticians developed their understanding of meaning over time. All right. And so, yeah, now they're starting to add some sort of ethical dimension to this because ethics matters here. Somebody should simulate the McLuhanite criticism. I ain't telling anybody what to do nowadays. If they want to, they can go right ahead. We also noticed that axiological systems rested either on modalities or on aspects. Thus, for example, morals of excess, such as potlatch, where one starves through excess but where one guards one's honor. The same holds true for Gogol's Cossacks, who behave more or less in the same way, except that they use vodka. On the other hand, there exists a moral of insufficiency, what in a restricted way the English call understatement. This is a moral of reserve, and the English share this with certain African peoples. If you analyze the folktales of many African nations, you can see that in the hero's qualifying test, he is accepted on the condition that he favor insufficiency, that he behave by doing less than he has to do, and not more. The acceptable is not exaggerated action, but staying within the means. If you are offered a gift, you accept only half of it. Excess and insufficiency are therefore a dimension of morality that is situated at the level of intensity and aspect. This is the major aspectual category. The other axis is one I have called processual aspectuality. In German, one distinguishes between two types of aspectuality: action art and action wise. This cannot be translated correctly into either French or English, I believe. Nevertheless, processual aspectuality can be defined by incoativity, durativity, and terminativity. God, this is just terrible. Incoativity, inchoate, being ingrown. Durativity, I guess duration of sort. And terminativity is the way it ends. These are weird fucking terms, but okay. This is just nutty terminology here to me. For example, what is a quick-tempered person? One who gets excited and acts for the slightest reasons. Durativity, okay, so I guess that would be incoativity, someone who just is this way. Durativity corresponds to patience, and terminativity is the craftsman's moral for work well done. Okay. To illustrate this, let us take the last French presidential elections. How could Mitterrand be opposed to Chirac? Mitterrand was presented as quiet strength, whereas Chirac was said to be agitated and restless. It is obvious we are dealing with aspectualities, and that the campaign was not won or lost by the valorization of moral types, or rather, I should not say moral, but instead using the term axiological, or axiological system, or axiological category. And for those who don't know, axiological just means value-based. So instead of moral, we're saying a moral system. That's what axiological is. So it's a study of more value-based systems. So it's sort of which value system are you choosing when you're choosing the French president. So this does make some sense. Since I thought everyone knew you get paid by the syllable in these things, yeah. What is difficult with aspectualities is that they disturb the neatness of semiotic appositive categories. This is because aspects are not of the type black and white, yes or no. Aspectual categories are tensive ones, and ultimately everything is based on tension, tensitivity, and laxity. Moreover, the relation subject-object, as seen by the observer, is a tensive one. The problematics I referred to is related to this aspectual syntax or tensive syntax or evaluative and gradual syntax that needs to be constituted. This is not a simple thing, and there is work for future generations. This could help literary semioticians approach textual reality somewhat. For when we consider how many of them currently analyze text, we can only conclude that their work is impressionistic. It can be more or less well done according to the talent of the analyst, but the know-how cannot be transmitted. Hence, it is not scientific. And you can see what they're starting to do here. We've got different poles that like things are like there's oppositions, and there's different ways that you could like relate, like maybe like a four-pole, like a square, and how things could relate to each other. But the way you set this up is going to be an act of like an artistic work. It's not going to be a set. So I mean, if you've got like hot-tempered versus like not hot-tempered, like these are like things that are opposed, these are contraries, and you could maybe get a logical relation between them, but the way you set the whole thing up is sort of like an artistic setup. It's not a scientific setup. Miro says, I'm not opposed to semiotics and philosophy as such. I just think semiotic theorists should recognize it's hard for semiotics to have the same credibility and rigor as natural science. Why do you think they're going for the same thing as natural science? That's like asking mathematicians to do what scientists do. It's not the same study. Why would they be trying to act like scientists? It's like logicians don't do what scientists do. So like you're not comparing apples to apples there. So don't ask a logician to be doing science. I don't worry about studying the world. Like that's not what I'm concerned with when I'm doing philosophy. So it's like you just got to be careful. It's like, yeah, the semiotician's not claiming to be a natural scientist either. They might think of themselves as scientists of language, but I mean, that would only be some of them. Yeah. And so semiotics is saying hell to the no. So yeah, I think that's the wrong way of thinking about what semioticians are doing. So I was like, I mean, maybe some of them do, but they would just be wrong, I think. Or they would be confused. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't say something like this. Hence, it is not scientific what the semiotician is doing. Like, this person wouldn't just, like, straight out say this. This would be an embarrassing thing to say right here. But they're not embarrassed by it. They just say, it is not scientific. It is a fact that this is not a scientific thing in this case. This is not embarrassing. This is just noting the way they go about work. Says, in semiotics mind, which someone does not agree with, even science is a subdiscipline of philosophy. Stand by that outlook. Yeah, so fine. Different people have different opinions. Some of them are wrong, but like, just don't be overly, like, don't be so rigid in what you think about it. It's me. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, science is a subdiscipline of philosophy. I stand by that. Yeah. So, I mean, the way things are related are funky. So, in this last stage, we are attempting to give a semiotic interpretation to the traditional theory of passions. Yeah, so again, now we've got a relation between all the different passions here. Semiotics began with the theory of actants and initially attributed to subjects only in the ability to act. Subjects were considered as acting beings without character or temperament. The theory of passions that is in part of every major classical system can be interpreted everywhere, in Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Nietzsche, and Freud, as a taxonomy, as a paradigmatic operation on lexemes. However, passions, their meaning and definitions can only be described as structures, which can in turn be described in terms of modal syntax, setting into place at least two interdependent actants. For example, avarice equals wanting to plus conjunction, or wanting to plus non-disjunction. Okay, so now we've got, you can see, these two things are logical things, and then we've got these two things over here on the left, the wanting. That's not a logical thing, but this is a mode you could be in. So it's a mode plus the logic. So like a state of being is a mode, like a wanting. Hence, semiotics, as we understand it, has become not only a semiotics of action, but also a semiotics of passions, a panthemic semiotics, to borrow a term from Spinoza. Thus, to analyze discourse in this way is to construct models which can account for the trajectory of the lives of subjects, of men. Interest was focused on subjects' trajectories, which are indeed realized by means of narrative programs in discourse or in the subject's own lived experiences. This made it possible to consider in detail not only the problem of objects of value, which are sought after by subjects, and the organization of these objects into axiological systems, but the organization of values as well into specific axiological discursive sequences. Yeah, so now you've got so like avarice is hate, and so you're in a state of wanting to do something with something else, a conjunction, and so now you can say, all right, we can talk about the mode of being hateful in this way and then derive consequences from it, from the structure of how we set up the narrative here, like the thing. And that's kind of what's going on. You're trying to derive logical consequences from a narrative that has more than just that logical inputs. Okay, Latvian Jesus says, science is a very specific historical thing. I'm sure many people today could recognize the abundance of influences strictly non-scientific things that have on our lives. Why seek scientific answers for unscientific things? Yeah, it's, you're not, a lot of different disciplines want to sort of take over. They want to make everything a science, make everything a sociology, make everything a physics, make everything whatever. Everything is art, everything is what, what actually is the use of these sorts of claims? Yeah. Miro asks, is the author of this paper coming from a specific meta-ethical perspective or no? I have no idea. They haven't really talked about that. I assume they have one, but I don't, that's just, it hasn't been discussed in this paper, and I don't know the author in general, so I can't really say. I don't know. Okay. In the author's Paris seminar, we have concentrated over the last 3 years on the status of and the possible semiotic approach to the following 3 issues in the history of philosophy: truth, good, and beauty. I might add that I had no philosophical ambitions in raising these issues, but that my interest was mainly practical. I wanted to know how a subject in life or in a text in which he is manifest selects axiological values, how he evaluates, sanctions, brings judgments of veridiction or aesthetic appreciation to bear on these values, how the subject is sometimes astonished or fascinated by their enabling him to say things about beauty or truth, for example. In other words, semiotics here focuses on the functioning of systems of values in these discourses. It is normal that these systems of veridiction make use of the articulated modes of semiotic existence, being versus seeming, the virtual versus the actual versus the realized, and the modal categories in order to produce discourses of persuasion or argumentation and to manifest this in an epistemic axiology. Yeah, so now what we're doing is, okay, they have these sort of structures that we're putting into formal syntax that we can analyze, and then from that people are actually generating ideas, and that's how the narrative is growing for them and for us to analyze what they're doing, and then we can know the value here, and that's what the epistemic is. Miro says if they're analyzing axiology, I ask because their metaethics might influence how they interpret value systems. Language appears to be what they're talking about. Yeah, I think they're really just coming at this from the semiotic perspective of they're trying to just sort of break it down into something that they can put formally, make it into a kind of a mathematical scheme. To that, you're probably right that whatever they actually do, since this is not a purely formal exercise, is going to be tinged by their background theories. Even though this person says, I came at this just as examples, no one can escape their, their background beliefs. So that's fair. In ethical space, we had to consider classical morals of a modal type, such as duty, desire, and pleasure. So yeah, you can see right here, in an ethical space, they just went with the classical ones. They're just talking about these old style stuff. the fact that they even consider these things already speaks to the kind of ideas they have going on in the background. Now, how much can you read into this? That, that's arguable. But this does already show a certain background of a certain kind of education. Where they are, they're in France, of course. So, like, there's a certain background theory here that is going on. Okay. However, a more important place had to be given to the aspectual categories, which constitute the background of ethical axiologies that vary from one culture to another. All one needs to do is think about the aspectual category of intensity and of the polarized and opposed morals of excess and potlatch and insufficiency which can be found throughout the world. The Indo-European moral of moderation that has nourished Occidental civilization for a long time and continues to do so even today should also not be forgotten here. Yeah, so they are at least admitting that what they say is like what they think. They know that there's other ethical theories out there. So the same observations hold as to aesthetic axiologies. The aesthetics of beauty has been officially dead since 1850, when the beauty of beauty was replaced by the beauty of ugliness. Edgar Allan Poe's horrible insect being substituted for the perfection of woman's body. Yet today, this is just 1985. What kind of sentence is this? Edgar Allan Poe's horrible insect being substituted for the perfection of woman's body. Oopsie, didn't mean to underline, but yeah. Yet today, the latest in aesthetic judgment, it seems, is the scandalous. Yeah, we're still there. When examined a little more carefully, a major axiological axis on which varied aesthetic judgments are based and where they are polarized by means of the opposition perfect versus imperfect can be distinguished. Whether it happens to be the classical beauty of perfection with the concept of simplicity and elegance, or the aesthetics of imperfection which alone lets us into it, and which, as Barth would say, opens up onto an aesthetic beyond, it is the aspectual categories, incomplete, evanescent, incoitive, and so on, that organize our vision of the world. Yeah, so, we're still in this sort of like TikTok, brain rot, memification things. And like these are just different aspects. Like it's just a lot more in our face and like whatever grabs us. So it's even more like immediacy here. So like this is like we're still talking the scandalous back in the day here. For us, it's more of just like immediately grabbing us. We're not pulled into these old style scandals like everyone was following the scandals. We're doing like the moment to moment scandals. We're doing the whatever gets like outrage on Twitter still. Like so we're doing like the instantaneous scandals. We've got the the indignation. We're not talking about scandals anymore. We're talking about indignation. Latvian says there is no mechanism upon which to separate people and their actions from conditions that give rise to them. Can't actually find a source besides being a rule for a streamer I like. Yeah. Good quote. But yeah. Okay. In the presence of such developments, we should not be surprised that semiotics as a whole has been turned upside down. The need has been felt to explore and draw conclusions not only about the importance of the modal articulations of discourse, but also, and even more perhaps, about the importance of its aspectual articulations. Instead of having as its task the description and elucidation of semantic content, semiotics became first a modal grammar before being progressively, or we should say perhaps complementarily, transformed into an aspectual grammar. In other words, instead of being considered as a sort of cultural ontology, semiotics has become an axiology of being. Yeah, so now we have like, what kind of person are you? Like, are you a TikTok person? Are you a Twitter person? Are you a Reddit person? And so these are not cultural ontologies, but the way we think of ourselves as being. It's not part of our culture to be on TikTok. It's like, well, what kind of like social media are you that you like to consume? The above more or less constitutes the outline of what in Paris is called basic semiotic theory. Yet new problems, new tendencies, and new directions in semiotics that are appearing on the horizon should be mentioned briefly before closing. The first is related to catastrophe theory, which is an attempt to ground semiotics in mathematics. This is directly related to work done by Jean Petitot, who is inspired by René Thom. As far as I can understand the starting point of the theory, when an actant meets an actant, they set off a catastrophe. Miro says, are we getting into like Hannah Arendt territory of the guilt of participating in societal pressure here? Or am I misunderstanding this quote? That's for Latvian Jesus. I don't know. Latvian says, this looks like I get when I say I'm a Twitch person teaches me to not share such a thing's cack. Yeah. I don't tell people I'm on Twitch. Alright. I do tell people I'm on Twitch. They don't know what it is. I don't tell them anything else about it. And so they don't know. And so it's not worth it. But you can see, Latvian Jesus, you tell people that and they're like, what the fuck? And like, that's the sort of thing. It's like saying something about you. It's not saying something about the culture. Like, that was the old way where you say, oh, these are our media that we consume in this culture. No, now it's more personally reflective of like the person itself. What kind of stuff do you consume? Yeah. The author is also aware that as far as the semiotic square is concerned, and this is what I was talking about earlier, how do you set up the relations between things? And a lot of times it's done in like squares of opposition. When a single actant actualizes a trajectory, that corresponds to 27 catastrophes. So yeah, there's a lot of different like little offshoots and shit. For me, this is not very economical, and so I leave this scientific task to mathematicians. To give an adequate formulation to semiotics and make it operational, homogeneous objects in isotopic language are needed so that the significations of the concepts remain unequivocal. Catastrophe theory is important insofar as it accentuates the reality of the world and gives a more scientific basis to the entire project. I was just yes and ending off me talking about being immersed and unable to escape your baggage. You bring your history into every reading. Fair. What else do I have? What else do we have here? I mean, like I said, when I philosophize, I'm dealing with things in my life. I don't normally think about society as a whole. I mean, I don't have access to society as a whole. I don't know enough history to be like, this is historical. That doesn't mean anything to me. So yeah. I mean, that's fair, Latvian. Like, some people have a good way with words, like better than me usually. So like, people say stuff and you're like, oh, that really hits and it's good. So good for them. Probably wasn't me. I almost guarantee it wasn't me. Another domain in which, although when I write, I do try to have some good turns of phrase, but I don't normally, in speaking, have good turns of phrase. On the other hand, my turns of phrase when speaking are quite often grammatical and well-formed sentences. So they make sense. They're not only like properly formed, but the sentences are well thought out. So, yeah. Society as a whole, next book idea, yeah. We're going that way, Cinesemiotics. We are going that way. And did you know the only natural enemy of the whole is the pile? Okay. Another domain in which a good deal of progress has been made is that of providing a definition for a typology of languages, especially monoplanar languages, biplanar languages, and metalanguages. This was inherited more or less from Hjelmsov and opposes us to Peirce, who in fact established a typology of signs. As far as we are concerned, linguistic systems and not signs are critical. In this vein, I had a long conversation with Eugene Vance, who recently finished a study on medieval sign systems. In his book, he showed that in medieval times, it is not a question of different signs, but of particular languages, of ways of understanding the world. In the same way, this leads us, for example, to the concept of semi-symbolic. In Hjelmsov's terminology, algebra belongs to the symbolic system, and so does the game of chess, where gestuology, nodding yes or no, for example, is of the order of semi-symbolic. Here, the vertical axis is used to say yes, and the horizontal one to say no. There are other possible combinations. For example, in the Balkans, under Turkish influence, only the vertical axis is used. To say yes, you tilt your head forward. To say no, you look up at the sky. Such an approach was suggested by Jacobson, and starting from this, I propose that we use the same type of language to interpret painting. This gave excellent results, and it seemed to be a sort of key to understanding plastic languages. We were also investigating the interpretation of musical language as a semi-symbolic system, which it is not entirely, but only in part. I mean, this is interesting. You can see in different cultures there are consistencies like this, the way you nod, and does that matter for other things? Like, so does this sort of gestural thing represent a symbol that is within that culture? And then can you use that more widely? Another point of interest is related to the cognitive dimension of discourse. Jacques Fontenelle defended a thesis on point of view in which he studied cinema, painting, music, advertising, literature, and quantum theory in an attempt to discover the specificity of how discourses break down into points of view. Proust Bell Towers of Martinville, where the towers can be seen but the point of view changes, provides an excellent example. This cognitive dimension of narrativity makes it possible for us to compare our work with that done in cognitive psychology and artificial intelligence. Excuse me. We came to the conclusion that compared to semiotics, artificial intelligence is not very efficient. It would seem that our global reflection on a theory of the sciences of man perhaps enables us to perceive things in a more encompassing way. So this is interesting. They're shitting on AI back in 1985. A true menagerie. Fair. Further work is being carried out on the modalization of communication theory. Instead of taking the traditional schema with a sender, receiver, and a message, two interacting modally competent subjects facing each other are positive. Each of these subjects, whether engaging in a conversation or arguing or fighting, has its own proper trajectory. Each subject has its own historicity and consequently does not possess eternal characteristics, but simply has its own modal history. Their meeting brings out a sort of polemic, a struggle between two competencies, and the structure of struggle can take the form of what we have called the polemico-contractual. In other words, we are dealing with continuous tension between primitive confrontation or contractuality, that is to say, structures of trust or polemics. Yet it should be added that there is never a definitive struggle. Nowadays, for example, there are only the rules of the game in nuclear dissuasion, which is typically polemical contractual. A major French strategist, General Poirier, don't know how to say that, calls this the semiotics of nuclear dissuasion. From this, it can be seen that there is a difference between what pragmaticians call conversational structures and what we call narrative structures, for in the narrative schema there exists a subject and anti-subject in a permanent conflictual situation. Yeah, and so you can see here, he's trying to take credit for like war games, this sort of thing, where you can describe the way like mutually assured destruction, where one side gets a new bomb, then the other side gets a new bomb, and so then you're like having a war game where you're in this sort of like contract where everyone lives as long as everyone is mutually assured that everyone would die, so no one wants to start a war because no one would win it. So that sort of narrative of mutually assured destruction, they're saying, well, there's a logic to that, and then the semiotics can point this out. So this is actually, like, this is they're like more raw semiotics here. Okay, in conclusion, I would like to say that we are focusing on three major problems. The first is related to the panthemic impact of language, the second to the ethic moralization of language, and the third to the aestheticization of language. The exploration and working out of these three domains will enable us to finish constructing our semio-narrative grammar. Hooray! Okay, thank you for sitting around through that with me. Thanks for the discussion, but now, as you know, we rate this. And so, if you're in chat, everyone who's in chat is welcome to rate. We've got brain dance. If you thought this had fun ideas and makes a brain dance, note that spelling and capitalization do matter. These are better TTV emotes. You can see them in chat below me here. If you only see the text in your chat, you can just get the extension at betterttv.com. But yeah, so brain dance for fun ideas makes your brain dance. Nog scream for existential or artistic drama. Nog oro, ouroboros for deeper ancient ideas. Nog knife for slicing and dicing arguments. Nog navel for navel gazing only for academics. Nog turd, all style no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, and also my vote meh. Note that anything in the green, I make an overall score, will make the score go up. Anything in the red will make it go down, and the vote meh actually makes it all go to the middle. So Latvian Jesus gave it a yay and a meh, so it wasn't quite a yay, wasn't quite middling, just a little bit over. Thank you for rating. Cincinnati gave it a yay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we commented on this earlier. This was really a lot of inside baseball. They were talking to other semioticians in France at like a invited speech. And so, yeah, exactly. In a good way, it's sort of nog naval. Like it really was. Miro gives it a meh. Thank you for rating. I appreciate it. So nog naval, I agree. It's got to be a naval, but you don't understand it enough to give it a vote. It doesn't matter if you understood it enough. I don't understand a lot of what's going on here. This is outside my area, but then again, this is only Twitch. It's okay. You can rate if you rate how you feel. But if you don't want to, you don't need to. Yeah, it's navel gazing. It's only for academics. And oh yeah, like if you want the score to go up, you can give it like 2 yays. That'll make the your overall score go up. In that case, since MX gave it a brain dance and a yay, yeah, so that's what I figure. You like this stuff, it's good. I mean, I feel like this was more of a historical paper. They were describing sort of like you were hoping like you were going to get a theory of meaning, and in the end you got sort of like this historical narrative of how semiotics has been, evolving over time. So for that reason, it's like it didn't really I felt like it didn't really I felt like I was a little misled. I thought I was going to get more to this, but it also is the nature of what it was. It was like an invited speech. Frank says if you give it 100 yays, I would outweigh everyone else's votes. The truth is yes. Like if I make an overall score, yeah, like you can actually, if I make an average of all of them, it will overweigh them. And this is one of the things I have to worry about when like doing this stuff. That like, yeah, you can outweigh everyone. But then again, I can, what's it called? I can account for that too. So it's funny. Miro says, when's my next stream? I stream usually on Sundays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. So
thank you very much.
Cheer 1, cheer 100, everything is a sinew wave.
Sinew wave. Thank you. Yeah, so I usually stream Sundays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern time. That's Eastern of the U.S. So 8 o'clock, I have a job, so I'm kind of a weekend warrior, but I usually stream twice a week. So today is Wednesday. I'll probably be back at Sunday at 8 p.m. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, Miro, I don't have anything lined up, but if you are in stream on Sunday, you can, and you find something you think I could read, drop it in chat. I'll take a look. That's how it goes. Thank you for the 101 bits, Senator Max. Adam says, we got an Oro, not an Oros, a scream, a meh, a grapes, and a navel gazing. Yeah. So what am I gonna say? This is fun. I haven't thought about this kind of history. Like this is kind of like a weird history of semiotics. Like I don't know, so it's kind of fun for me to see this. I'll give it a brain dance, but it's also gonna get like I also felt like, what I give it. I gave it a navel gaze and a brain dance, and it's like it didn't really hit for me because I'll tell you right at the end I knew what was gonna happen. It's like, oh, if we could only solve these few problems, we really do well. And like, so in this last sentence, I know you can't see it because the review screen is up. The ethical moralization of language, aesthetization of it, and what the heck does they even mean by panthemic? I mean, like pathos, like the feeling. So that's like sort of like the emotional. I take it panthemic means like the emotional impact. Let's go see what the computers say about this. I mean, the internet says panthemic. I want to get exactly. I thought it was just like pathos, but I'm wrong. No, I just want panthemic. Yeah, it doesn't even it's not even coming up on a definition. No, not pandemic. I need yeah, see, it's not even coming up. It's like yeah. Maybe it's see, religious beliefs, it's not like pantheon. Yeah, see, I'm not entirely even sure what this panthemic is. The panthemic impact of language. Is that the... Oh, maybe, okay. Alright, so now I'm getting it better. they're using it more like pantheon, but not like in terms of like gods, but in the way that you're setting up your ontology, the way your languages set up the aspectual version of your world. So you have like a pantheon of aspects in your universe. That's what they mean by this panthemic impact. This is the aspect, like all the different aspects that you are in your culture are sort of like think are important. Hey, what's up, Sam? No, so this panthemic here, I know you can't say it's like panthemic, is kind of a pantheon. So it's a pantheon of aspects. So I think this is what we're really getting at. The way you set up the important modes of existence in your life. Yeah. At the mic? Yeah. So yeah. So overall, I'm going to give this like, I'm going to give this a vote. Like I have to kind of give it a meh, unfortunately. So let's see, I'll give it a meh. So yeah, so like a brain dance, a meh, and a navel gazing. That's kind of how I feel about it. We're in the middle, but like at the end, they're like, but we still have these big things that we have to figure out. But these are the fucking let's see, this is the difference between me and a semiotician. They're like, we just can figure these things out. I'm like, dude, these are the major questions. If we had the correct ontology of like what matters to us in a pantheon of aspects, we would be way ahead of the game. If we understood moralization, we would be way ahead of the game. If we understood the aesthetization, if we understood aesthetics, we understand none of these things. That's why like philosophers go worry about them. But like from the semiotic point of view, it's like, yeah, we'll figure out some sort of good scheme about this. And then from my side, I'm like, that's the whole game. And so yeah, I have not done Scruton. I have actually, that's not fair. This is episode 601 of Philosophy Roulette, Miro. I think I've talked about Scruton before. I can't even remember. Importantly, I wanted to say I never read them first, so either don't blame me, just fate. Yeah. Okay, 60 seconds in, and anyone else want to get your review in? Now's your time. I have actually, that's not fair. This is episode 601 of Philosophy Roulette, Miro. I think I've talked about Scruton before. I can't even remember. Importantly, I wanted to say I never read them first, so either don't blame me, just fate. Yeah. Okay, 60 seconds in, and anyone else want to get your review in? Now's your time. I mean, this paper was okay. Like, it's not a bad speech, but like, it was just, I felt a little light. Again, it's a semiotic speech to a semiotic crowd. It was a little light on the philosophy, and I felt like, a little bit like we were discussing how it's self-congratulatory, but then again, it was more historical. Insofar as like a historical piece, it was okay. Like, it wasn't that bad.